I'd like to introduce y'all to today's presenters, and I'm spotlighting them at the exact same time. So give me 1 second. We have Chandler Picot, Jorden Scott, and Mr. Randy Abbott. And also too, just FYI, we are recording this presentation. At the end, when we get to discussion and questions and things, we will turn off the recording so you can freely ask questions. All right, Chandler and Jorden and Randy, y'all can take it away.
Thank you. I just want to thank you, Doug. Thank you, Sync, for allowing us to get on here and share a little bit about what Expand Good Sam is and the goals therein. So I want to introduce myself and a little bit about the program. Then I'm going to introduce the wonderful co-hosts, fellow committee members. My name is Chandler Picot. I am a person in long-term recovery. I've been in recovery for 5+ years, and I do a lot of advocacy work, and I enjoy it deeply. Part of that advocacy work is the Expand Good Sam Committee. For those of you that don't know, North Carolina has a Good Samaritan Law, and that Good Samaritan Law protects people from prosecution in limited fashion when they call for help. Now, the law was written in 2013, passed in 2013, and since then, we have learned that there's many more protections that need to be made available. So that's part of our coalition's committee's goal. So that's one of the big things we're working on. The ultimate goal is to save lives. That's really what we want. We want to make sure that people are able to live and not die needlessly. And we chose Expand Good Sam because part of that, we chose the parable of the Good Samaritan, partly because the Good Samaritan was a person in biblical times. It was a biblical story where they were on a road, and a person who you would have never thought would have helped them. And we use this as a way to draw parallels between what we would like to see done and what we do, right? Oftentimes it's the least of these that actually help. So that's my spiel, and I would like to go ahead and introduce Randy Abbott and Jorden. Randy, feel free.
So if I seem to pause a little bit, my computer, for whatever reason, is being a little jumpy today. I apologize. So I'm Randy Abbott. I am a recovery resource advocate with the Alcohol and Drug Council of North Carolina. I also do hold a number of advocacy roles throughout the state. Came to this work in January of 2015 after losing our daughter to an overdose. Good Samaritan Law specifically is something I'm very passionate about, in that when my daughter overdosed, the group she was with chose not to dial 911 immediately. And so that's me in a very small nutshell. Jorden?
Hey, good morning, everybody. I'm Jorden Scott. I'm a community organizer that works in policy reform, both in North Carolina as well as in Pennsylvania. I also work in peer support. I'm with the Pennsylvania Harm Reduction Network, and also serve on the Expand Good Sam North Carolina Committee, and as well as the National Coalition to Liberate Methadone. Also, this work is important to me, not only as a drug user, but also somebody who has been, burying my friends for over 2 decades now, and have, lost friends that would still be alive if we had stronger immunity protection.
Thank you. Thank you so much for introducing yourselves. And without further ado, let's get on into the program. Thank you so much. So this next slide you will see is just a small amount of folks that we've lost to overdose in North Carolina. This is a massive issue. It truly is. So you will see there, Stephen Allen and Michael Gashanti. They were actually in my halfway house in Asheville when I stayed there. I stayed there for around a year, and we became close. We became friends, and they passed away both from accidental overdoses. Michael was doing well for a couple years. He ended up getting some bad heroin. I believe it was fentanyl. Most heroin is actually fentanyl now. And Stephen, the same way. And seeing his parents just absolutely devastated, his loved ones. I mean, Stephen had kids. He had 2 children, and they're not going to grow up with a father, and that's horrible. And that's just, these are just 2 amazing people out of a multitude. So I just, this is without a doubt the driving factor for me as to why we need to expand the Good Samaritan Law in North Carolina. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and defer to Randy and then Jorden to share their experience with this unfortunate overdose.
So yeah, this is our why slide, I guess, for each of us, if you will. Vanessa was, she was just this amazing person. I tell the story that if she saw someone homeless asking for change on the street, she'd go buy their lunch. She wouldn't just hand it to them. She'd go sit down and eat with them. And that was just her. That was the type of person she was. Down in the bottom corner, Boone Cummins and Sean O'Donnell, they are the sons of 2 of the members of the Expand Good Sam NC Coalition. Both were at a quarry in Chatham County, I guess where the teenagers hang out, and had been drinking, had passed out. Their friends left them. This wasn't at the same incident. It was weeks apart. And they both fell in the quarry and drowned. Again, because their friends were frightened that they would get in trouble. They were underage, they were drinking, and they didn't call 911. So, Jorden?
So I have pictures of my best friend, Hillary. She died in 2009 after her boyfriend panicked when she stopped breathing and overdosed from a combination of heroin and Xanax. At the time, of course, Pennsylvania did not have their Good Sam Law legislation. My brother Will passed away from an overdose in February of 2013. This was shortly before Delaware passed their own Good Samaritan protection. I always include my brother because with push for policies like death by distribution laws, I always tell people if that law had been enacted, I would have lost both of my brothers that day because it was my other brother who had purchased the drugs that they used that night. And there is a picture with one of our coalition members, Roxanne, with Mark Kinsley and Dan Big. They were 2 of her, mentors as well as good friends. And for those of you that don't know, we have Mark and Dan to thank for our ability to distribute naloxone, widely without liability. If it had not been for the 2 of them, we wouldn't be able to do that.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And I forgot to mention as well, Stephen Allen and Michael Gashanti both actually were unfortunate victims of accidental overdose. And had they had someone there to call, who knows? So thank you. So the agenda, let's go over the agenda for today. So we're going to discuss overdose in North Carolina. We're going to talk a little bit more about expanding the Good Samaritan Law and what that entails. Going to discuss more of the policy. Randy will go into more detail around that. and we're going to have a Q&A session. So it's going to be a good one, guys. Thank you so much. We can go to the next slide. Awesome. So this is the North Carolina Medical Examiner's Report. And if you look, you can see, right, we are up to 398 overdose deaths in 2023. Now, in 2022, this was 372. Sure, it may only be a 20 increase, but that's still enough to show that we are on an upward trajectory. That's an issue.
Yeah, I'm gonna jump in real quick just to clarify that 398 is just for the month of May, not for the whole year. Okay, that's just for the month of May.
Thank you. Yes, so just for the month of May, I mean, that's horrific. So every single month we're averaging close to 400, and that goes up, that goes down, but this is a serious issue, and this is from a reputable source. So we need to really address this, and one of the efforts, one of the ways that we are working to do this is by expanding the current protections under the Good Samaritan Law. So without further ado, let's go over the parable, right? What is the Good Samaritan Law? The Good Samaritan Law is intended to protect someone who provides assistance to someone who is ill or incapacitated. So in the Bible, right, regardless of religious affiliation or whatever, there is a tale of a person who has been badly beaten on the side of the road, and multiple people come by, people who are priests, people who are in high standing in society, and they do not help this person stuck in the ditch. You would think, well, wouldn't you want to help this person that is suffering? No, they don't. They turn their noses up and they go. But the Samaritan, which in biblical times was persona non grata, a Samaritan in biblical times was just seen as the worst of the worst of society, very frowned upon. This Good Samaritan went, helped this person who was suffering, laying there near death, and took this person, this man, and cared for them, took them to their home, made sure everything was good with them, tended their wounds, and then gave them money and sent them on their way. So what you have here is people helping others, right? That's the goal, helping others who are literally in the same situation. Thank you.
So can you hear me? Yeah, okay. I was trying to, for a reason my mute is not working properly, but so yeah, the in North Carolina, our current Good Samaritan Law, we've got a lot of information to cover still. So I'll just quick disclaimer, I'm going to buzz through these next 4 or 5 slides really fast. If I go too fast, we will have a Q&A at the end, or just raise your hand and tell me to slow down, whatever. So in North Carolina, the current law protects just the caller and the overdose victim against prosecution. It does not protect from arrest or charge. So that becomes problematic when you're looking, you still have that arrest on your record. And when you're looking for a job, those things are going to pop up on a job application. We also need to protect from a wider array of drugs in North Carolina. You know, I'm not going to read the slides to you, but you can see here what percentages of overdose deaths in North Carolina are involving opioids. Fentanyl, obviously, I don't think it's a surprise probably to anybody on this call, are leading the overdose deaths. The Good Samaritan Law, to be effective, needs to protect everyone at the scene. There's a couple of reasons for that. One, that whole panic thing. My daughter was at a small party, and everyone at the party was scared. They didn't want to dial 911. There was paraphernalia, there were drugs. But just as importantly is there are people at a party, they're all under the influence of whatever they may be under the influence of. The last thing we want to have happen is for them to get out on the road, leave, put themselves and others at danger on the road. Excuse me. Again, the need to protect against arrest and charge. This shows what some of the other states are doing, but this slide actually narrows it down, I think, a lot better. 30 states in the US currently have language in their Good Samaritan Law that provides protection for arrest, charge, and prosecution. And there are a mix of conservative and liberal states. So if 30 other states in the United States can find a way to work on this and come to terms across the aisle, so to speak, certainly North Carolina should be able to do that, right? Unfortunately, we are seeing some challenges with getting this done. And right now, we'll talk about things you can do and how you can take action. One I'll mention right now is talking to your law enforcement. If this is something that's important to you, right now our Police Chiefs Association, the Sheriff's Association are really pushing back against expanding the Good Sam law to offer these kinds of protections. And as long as people are afraid, they're worried about being arrested, they're worried about being charged with any level of charge that they could be hit with right now, some pretty serious, as you probably know. That's going to be a barrier to people dialing 911. So, and with that, Jorden is going to carry us through the next several slides.
All right, thanks, Randy. I do just want to note on the previous slide where we had, kind of broken down those different protection categories across the states that do have Good Sam, that the vast majority of states do not include protections from people being charged with things like death by distribution or, drug-induced homicide. And there are majority of states do not provide protection for people that are on probation or parole or under some type of court supervision, which adds another layer, another barrier to people calling for help. So it's also really important that when we talk about drug policy as a whole, but specifically looking at Good Samaritan laws, is understanding the racial, implications and considerations that we have to keep in mind. So one, starting with Good Samaritan laws overall provide exceptions to very certain criteria related to the possession of drugs. And what that exception looks like varies state to state. Most often, it's going to be in line with that state's trafficking guidelines and defined by, weight limits of the drugs that somebody may have on them. And I'll talk about it more in detail in another couple slides, but when we're looking at only providing exception for a certain amount of drugs in, in the era of fentanyl, where it has a much shorter high than heroin, fentanyl users are using more often, more frequently, building up a tolerance. So when we, for example, only provide protection for, up to 1 gram of fentanyl, that's a very, very narrow window that is going to exclude majority of drug users. Even in states where there is broad protection, we have to acknowledge that minority populations are still disproportionately arrested, specifically for, drug offenses that come with much more severe penalties. It's not uncommon, and it's just a part of our, justice system at this point, that minorities are frequently and most often labeled as a drug dealer versus a drug user, even if they are caught in the same environment as a non-minority person is, with the same amount of drugs, same type of drugs, same criminal history. Those outcomes are going to look very differently. And it's also important that even in very broad Good Samaritan protections, law enforcement is still given a lot of discretion at the scene in who they charge, what they charge them with, if they're charged at all. And to my knowledge, every Good Samaritan law includes civil immunity protection. So like if you look at Good Samaritan law, at some point, there's going to be a couple sentences that pretty much says, as long as a law enforcement officer acted in good faith, they are protected from any civil liability. So if I call for an overdose and the cops come and I am subsequently arrested and charged, and I spend, however long in the county jail before my case goes before a judge, and in that process, I lose my job, I lose my home, I lose custody of my kids, I don't have any recourse against that law enforcement officer for their actions. And if you want to scan this QR code, it does go directly to a study that was done on that exact issue. Well, the overall, the racial implications of Good Samaritan laws, but everybody is going to get the slides as well. So now it's really important that we talk about how other laws and how we advocate often has very direct and negative consequences on the people that we're supposed to be helping, right? Drug users. So currently, I wasn't able to check this morning. I do not know. So I do not know if it did go up for a committee vote last night. Last we heard, it had been re-referred back to the Rules Committee. But so House Bill 258 was the novel Opioid Control Act that was introduced separately. When it made the crossover into the Senate, additional language was added from House Bill 250. So why is this such an issue? So starting with it, if you want to go to the next slide, Randy. So starting with, it is going to revise North Carolina's current death by distribution law. The main issues with that is, obviously it is still a Class C felony if you are charged and convicted of the sale of a controlled substance that is the cause of death. However, it also would be a Class C felony for simply delivering or sharing a drug with somebody else that is the cause of their death. And for any of you that are, directly working with drug users, whether we're talking daily drug user, an adolescent who is experimenting, the weekend party or whatever it may be, drugs are frequently and often shared with people. And, so there is research and studies that have been done that show that death by distribution or drug-induced homicide laws directly correlate to people not calling for help. If somebody is aware that there is a chance that they can be charged with essentially murder, no, they're not going to call, right? And I had mentioned earlier, so in this bill, they added a Good Samaritan, quote unquote, protection, but it is only up to 1 gram of fentanyl, which is not realistic and isn't going to protect anybody and is not going to encourage people to call for help. And the whole point of a Good Samaritan law is to provide protection so people call for help in the event of an overdose.
And one other thing I'll point out, Jordan, that I've read through this thing a dozen times and had people explaining it to me. If you down even under that new provision that they've put in 258 as a Good Samaritan provision to include the drugs, if you dial 911, you're even only protected under that if the person lives. And I know that sounds like a horrible way to put it, but if the person dies, you can still be charged. And under this new law, you could be charged with first-degree murder, depending on quantities and that type of thing. So it's not a good law.
All right, we're gonna go to the next slide. And so the other part of the novel opioid control act is it schedules a very long list of drugs. Most of them are fentanyl or nitazene, analogs, derivatives. But the most important thing to point out about that list of drugs that would be scheduled is the majority of them are not even showing up in the North Carolina drug supply. And most likely won't. So when we look at, again, like the other issues of this law, it doubles the sentencing minimums. It also doubles the fines that are imposed, which also is determined by whether or not the controlled substance is an opioid and also the weight. You can see fines for trafficking in opioids starts at $500,000. And the maximum fine for an opioid can go up to $1 million. It would also create a task force and would change how and when an autopsy can be ordered. As Randy mentioned, it adds first-degree murder, which is a Class A felony if certain criteria is met. It adds an additional classification including whether they can prove that you operated with malice, which essentially, depending on the lawyer, depending on the ADA, they would have to prove that you knowingly knew that there was, fentanyl or an opioid in what you sold and knew that it would contribute to this person's death. And also adds a clause, charge for aggravated death by distribution. And it does distinguish between sale and delivery, but again, like it's not gonna do anything, right? It's not gonna be effective. And also, again, going back to and considering those racial implications. All right. So the next slide is House Bill 6407. I did check it earlier this week. There has not been recent movement on it, but essentially, the biggest issue with this bill is it would expedite the process of being able to remove children from their homes. It would expedite and expand the criteria and process for terminating somebody's parental rights. It amends, you can see that the definition of a neglected juvenile would include, any misuse of both illicit and licit controlled substances by their parent, their guardian, whoever is in charge of their care. It would also enable judges to remove a child even before it has been born, if it's exposed to a controlled substance while in utero. And really the most disturbing part of this bill is the state would not have to jump through hoops. Sorry, wrong language. The state would have a much easier process of ending parental rights, as I mentioned earlier. Because, you know, so typically if a child is removed from the home, the ultimate goal is and should be reunification. And it is typically, the burden is on the state to prove why reunification is no longer a possibility. So this bill would essentially remove that burden from state officials. And as I said, make it much easier for people to have their parental rights terminated. And also adding that, again, that will disproportionately affect minority populations. So I'm going to turn it back over to Randy to talk about, you know, some ways that you all can, you know, get involved.
My mouse is moving at half the speed that I would like it to move, sorry. So yeah, ways that you can take action. You know, I talked about earlier, contacting your law enforcement. And I think right now, if you have law enforcement, all the way from the officers on the street to right up to the chiefs of police and your sheriffs and sheriff department, that would be some huge conversations that you could have right now. I will tell you now, if you're not QR code person, and that's perfectly acceptable, all of these links are going to be on a page in the presentation, the actual hot link. So you can click on that as well when you get a copy of the presentation. But you know, as the Expand Good Sam NC Coalition has evolved, we have also tried to make it easy for people to say, yes, I support this, I want to be involved. We have 3 different opportunities on our website. I don't think the organization is active on the website yet, but the form is active here. So you can sign on as an individual supporter. If it's something that you say, yes, I want to get behind, let us know the level of involvement you'd like to have. I'd love to send letters. I'd love to go talk to legislators. You can do all of that when you sign on as an individual supporter. If you're a faith leader or you're from a faith community, we would love to have more people, our faith leaders, sign on a letter. Right now, individual supporters are over 300. Faith leaders are, last time I checked, about 150. And organizations, we've just added that recently, and I think we're at about 20 organizations that have said, yeah, here you go. Their logos will appear on our website and literature and stuff that we hand out. So that's another way that you can get involved. Also, our bill sponsors for SB 458, send these sponsors an email and let them know that you support this, you want to see this move forward, and just thank them. Say thank you for doing this, and ask them how you can get involved further. I know that Senator Hanning's assistant, LA, is very active in keeping people updated on what's going on with SB 458. Senator Moffitt has personal experience in his family with this field. He's very passionate about it. And Senator Adcock as well has been very, very involved with this. So thank them. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Chandler for Q&A. We finished about 5 minutes earlier, I think, than we had planned. So hopefully we'll have some good questions.
Thank you so much, Randy, Jorden, everyone. I appreciate it. And I want to really highlight real quick the Expand Good Sam committee members. We do have a committee that is, I think, sizable. And I wanted to spotlight them, say thank you. Thank you. Some of them are actually in this presentation right now. And I just wanted to encourage everyone, if you saw anything that you really struck a chord, check it out, right? Send an email to a senator. Join us, right? We absolutely meet monthly, twice a month sometimes. So just please check us out.